Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
Sparks, it is so great to be on this call with you. I salute you for all the work that you have done. I am a little bit of a policy geek. You probably couldn't tell by this pop collar that I have, but I've always wanted to be in conversation with you. You was someone who was always on my get to interview. So it is an honor and a pleasure that I had this chance to be on this call with you. Thank you for the advocacy and for fighting the fight, as it is not easy. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this call. I have a personal connection to this call. I am from the state of Michigan. I am born and raised in Lansing, Michigan. I hashtag all my Instagram posts pure Michigan for the most part. And of course, the most important thing that I hashtag is Go Blue. As a University of Michigan graduate, Michigan represents so much to me. Although I do live in New York City, it's interesting. As I was younger, I wanted to run away from Michigan as quick as I could because it wasn't exciting enough for me. It wasn't enough lights. But now having all the lights I've had for these number of years, I'm actually ready to come back home. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation because in order for me to come back home, I have to make sure I have the technology that I need in order to do my job so that I don't become part of the unemployment numbers, Commissioner, that you were just mentioning. And so it's important that we do have this broadband and technology because media entertainment is technology. It is the foundation of what we're doing. We wouldn't be able to have this interview that we're having right now if it wasn't for technology. And so this is why it's important to have this conversation. And so someone who I want to bring into the conversation now who is going to ensure the protection to make sure I have a place to come back home to and that technology is there is Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence. Brenda Lawrence is someone who I followed her race. Interesting enough, she was running against a personal friend of mine who shall not be named, but I loved him dearly. It was a very competitive race between the two of them, and I was always watching her. And if my boy was going to lose to somebody, I'm glad that he lost to Brenda Lawrence because she is a tireless advocate. Congresswoman, I have seen you fight. I have seen you in the trenches. I have seen what you've done on behalf of your community, and particularly the bougie side of Detroit, which is Southfield. That's a little inside joke that we have there going on. And I'm curious if you go to Southfield later for a high, because I think Lieutenant Garlin Gilchrist will be able to add some color to the difference between those two institutions. So without further ado, enough of me, more of the dynamic Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence. Welcome to this conversation, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Mike. And we'll have our arms open welcoming you home. I want to say good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank all of the listeners for joining us today and the FCC Commissioner Starks. Thank you so much for today because this discussion is very important and timely. The digital divide. I remember when I first heard that and asked someone, tell me what you mean when you say that. And at that time, many of you know I served on a school board locally. And so we're talking about innovation, how we are educating children, how parents are supporting the education of their children at home. Ladies and gentlemen, this issue of a digital divide is something that this virus have just pulled the scab off. It's an ugly sore in our country. I'm glad that we have panelists today that are experts that can shed some light on it. My amazing colleague, Elissa Slotkin, she's a freshman, but you would never know it. She is just a brilliant advocate and tireless fighter for our country. Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, a young man that gives me hope for the future of this country. He's just amazing on so many levels. I thank him for his leadership every day during this virus. Miss Fazlusa, who is from Common Sense Media, thank you so much for being here. Joshua Edmonds from the City of Detroit, and Angela Cipher from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I want to thank them all for joining us today. So let's talk about this digital divide. In America, there's a category of people who we call the working poor. They go to work every day. They're not sitting around with their handouts for anyone to give them anything. But because of the salaries and other issues, Some, especially if it's a woman, single head of household, may work two jobs, one job just to pay for childcare, and the other to put food and on the table and shelter and clothes for their children. So by the time they pay their bills, luxuries, and unfortunately, access to media, to the internet, to the broadband, has in some families become a luxury. It's just not attainable. And so when I heard the interesting comment that everybody goes home to be safe, we're going to telework, everyone work from home. For some people, that was not an option. And it became glaringly aware when we said our children will stay at home and we're going to have online learning. Well, for some children, that is not a reality. And we're confronted with that ugly reality of dividing our country up. And the digital divide is one of those that put people in pockets of disparity, this pockets of lack of access that adds to the divide of wealth in this country. I was so proud to lead a letter to that Commissioner Stark referenced with the Senators Stabenow and Peters and the entire Michigan delegation, and it was one from our senators as well, to prioritize and provide funding for essential broadband programs in this next relief program. And I'm proud to say we're having ongoing discussions every day. And broadband continues to be one of those high priorities. Now, I can tell you, oftentimes when we talk about the digital divide or lack of broadband, it's usually referencing the rural America. But now we have this opportunity with this broadcast, with the collective mind, to awaken America to the digital divide right in urban America. And our children who live in poverty, are those who do not have access, are being left behind. Michiganders here in Michigan, we know what it means to fight back and to find resources. So being a former mayor, one of the things that really made me stop and think, because when they said, okay, children go home and learn online, I fought hard to have a library that had amazing computer labs. So if a child didn't have it at home, they could go to the library. We shut down all the libraries. So these children were literally with no resources. So I look forward to all the questions and the interactions. And before I leave the screen, I just want to say to everyone, I am praying for your families, your safety, and for your well-being. For those who have survived this virus, I know the stress that has gone through that. Um, we must get through this together, and I'm committed to doing that. Thank you, and I will give it back to our moderator, Mike.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lawrence. I appreciate your remarks. You have made Delta Sigma Theta very proud. As a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, I salute you, my friend, Encryption and Grieve. Yo. With that being said, I want to now turn our attention to Representative Elissa Slotkin. Representative Slotkin, you are my congressperson in Lansing, Michigan. My mother often talks about you pretty often and frequently. And so I'm paying attention to what is happening in my home city. I really do love home. And to what the Congresswoman Lawrence was talking about, she really mentioned a couple of things. She mentioned work and she mentioned school. And she mentioned rural. What people don't realize, let me be more personal. What I didn't realize is how rural the state of Michigan really is until I left the state of Michigan and I came back. Growing up, I literally thought Michigan was Lansing, Saginaw, Flint, and Detroit, and maybe Muskegon. But that about it, though. I didn't think anything else. And then going back and exploring more, we went to Mackinac Island, we went to Traverse City, but you're just staying on the highway, right? You're just passing through. That's the only part when you go up to Upper Peninsula. Michigan is rural. It really, really is rural. And Congresswoman Slotkin, you represent a really interesting district where it is rural and it's city, but it's also blue collar as it is white collar. And so that is the digital divide affects all those entities very differently. How are you looking at it, like a state of the district, if you will, of trying to weave that needle through rural, city, union, blue collar, and white collar, and the needs of that district?
Yeah, thanks for having me. First and foremost, to the commissioner, to my fellow congresswoman, it's great to be allowed to participate. We do have one of those interesting districts. Michigan's 8th district is mid-Michigan. You know, Rochester Hills through Lansing, urban, suburban, and rural. And, you know, as Congresswoman Lawrence alluded to, the COVID-19 crisis is basically taking every inequality that we already had existing in our society and pulling at the seams and putting a spotlight on it. And that is completely obvious when it comes to the area of broadband. I represent some really rural areas. I'm tuning in here from my farm in Holly, Michigan, and just down the road, we have Heartland, Michigan, where over 20% of the students have no access to the internet. The teachers are literally Xerox copying worksheets and dropping them off in the mailboxes of the students just to keep their minds active and keep them doing something. But then on the other side of the district in Lansing, you have access issues as well. And I think the thing that has really been driven home for me is that we have to start thinking of internet access as a public utility. It's like having access to electricity or water or telephone service. It's something that's becoming standard and required to function in modern day America. And so there's a bunch of us, Congresswoman Lawrence being one of them, who has been at the forefront of pushing this concept. But in the meantime, we're just trying to work and parse through the problems we have in our district. And I really break it down in 3 ways. We have a problem of access, right? We have folks in our district who are just live in such a rural area that there's no signal that they can get. There's no fiber optic way that they can get internet access. Then you have the issue that I think is coming down the pike, which is bandwidth. We've got a lot of kids who are on the internet and they're doing their few hours a day. But what if we needed to continue doing this at a rigorous level with testing and sort of more formal? I don't think a lot of kids would have the bandwidth to be able to do that, especially multiple kids in the home, to be able to keep up with the needs from school. If we needed to do more online, we're already struggling with that. And then devices, right? It's one thing to have the internet, it's another thing to have the device that lets you interact with school or with work. And we know that our school districts are struggling to get the devices to the kids who need them most. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an issue that really binds together urban communities, suburban communities, and rural communities. And I think it's an area where, you know, sometimes in a moment of real crisis, we can find real opportunities. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone on how we turn this into a moment where we have kind of a realization that broadband is something that's a public utility for everybody.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin, for those words. I just want to turn the attention now over to someone who's a frequent guest of the Mike Muse Show, which is the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, I have particular interest with you around this conversation because of your background in technology. I don't think enough people really understand how your background is computer engineering and computer science. And so when we talk about digital divide and digital technology, this is your wheelhouse. The Congresswoman Slotkin just mentioned about schooling. My issue that I'm thinking about during COVID-19 is K through 12, right? And those individuals who are in rural and in city who may not have access to that ability to do the worksheets that the Congresswoman was talking about. They may not have the ability to tune in and to be present in class. How are you looking at it from a state perspective from the K through 12 digital divide narrative?
Mike, thank you. And I want to thank the commissioner for hosting us. I want to thank Congresswoman Slotkin and Congresswoman Lawrence, who is my Congresswoman. Really proud to be here with you and the rest of our panelists. When talking about this challenge of internet access and how it relates to education, this has been something that's been present in our communities for far too long. And I'm certainly one, and our administration has been advocating to increase access to the internet across the state of Michigan because it is critical for education, for health, for economic opportunity, and just enabling people's imaginations to think about how they can take part and help shape the future. I want to put some numbers around what Congresswoman Slotkin just shared around these challenges around both children not having internet-enabled devices in their homes, as well as not having sufficient internet access or internet access at all. So we, in the beginning of this COVID-19 crisis, as we were weighing the decision of whether to end face-to-face K-12 education, one of the considerations was an understanding of our internet access gap and how we could fill that. And so our estimates working with school districts across the state is that there are about 600,000 children in the state of Michigan who do not have access to an internet-enabled device in their home. 600,000. And the number of kids who don't have sufficient internet access in their house, so as Congresswoman alluded to, being able to stream more than one video at one time or even have access to the internet, it's about 60,000 kids across the state. Those are pretty staggering numbers. And so what we're working to do at the state level, both in the context of the pandemic, but also to lay the foundation for continued collective connectivity, is we have simply, we've issued challenges. We've issued challenges to the providers in the state of Michigan to say that, you know, this is part of the unprecedented time, the unprecedented response that we need is for everyone to step up and play their part. You've seen providers do things like eliminate data caps and those kinds of things. We need them to step up and do even more. And so I have been personally working with, as part of our COVID-19 response, device manufacturers, internet service providers of all stripes across the state of Michigan to work to make these things available to these children, these households first. But also, I think the things that we'll learn in the context of the pandemic will help us deal with those broader challenges. The challenge of access and build out. So literally the internet will be built to serve more people from an infrastructure perspective. The challenge of affordability, where we're rethinking what it truly means for the internet to be affordable. So while we have programs like Internet Essentials and AT&T Access, how can we go further and innovate from a business model perspective about how we can deliver the service? And then the third piece that I want to touch on is digital literacy. The fact that when someone has access to the asset of internet access, when someone is able to afford it in their family budget, then how do we ensure that people are empowered with the tools and the skills and the resources and sensibilities to be able to take full advantage of everything that internet access has to offer: entertainment, education, economic opportunity, healthcare outcomes, all the above. And the last thing I'll say before passing it back, Mike, is this also has an impact on our public health. We have done things in Michigan to greatly expand telemedicine and its availability. And the last conversation I had with the FCC was back in 2015 here in the city of Detroit, talking about connecting the health. And so making sure that people have sufficient internet access to manage their health, not just their symptoms in the context of coronavirus and COVID-19, but manage preventative health plans through having a relationship with their doctor that can work both in person and through telemedicine. By making physicians' services more available to people who are able to be connected, and physicians to be able to serve more people and to make sure that Medicaid can cover that. These are the policy and infrastructure things that we're trying to work on at the state level. And hopefully we can create some models here that will be replicable across the country.
Particularly when you talk about the challenges and issuing challenges, which brings me to Joshua Edmonds. Joshua Edmonds is from the city of Detroit, really focused on digital inclusion. And this has a sweet spot for me because of the K through 12 and because of the numbers that we are understanding who will be most direly impacted by not having access to broadband and digital access. A large number comes from that share, as Garlin Gilchrist was just talking about, numbers and data. So Joshua, can you talk to us a little bit more how the city of Detroit is not only thinking through this, but currently dealing with this crisis of COVID-19 when it comes to K through 12 education, recognizing that all the students may not even have access to broadband technology and or may not even have access to the products that are actually needed?
Sure. So I want to thank everybody. Thank Commissioner Starks, Congresswoman Lawrence, obviously, Lieutenant Governor. I'm not sure if he's still foregoing his haircuts, but I definitely am. And as always, it's great to see Angela Seifer. She's been an incredible asset, as well as the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, that has directly informed our work on the ground in Detroit. I'll say, I also want to give a huge shout out to Mayor Duggan and my Chief Information Officer, Beth Niblock, who had the foresight to prioritize digital equity, prior to COVID in a significant way by way of appointing me to actually do this work. So this was my day in and day out. And I, want to say that is advantageous to us because we can essentially showcase to other communities that are going through COVID right now that, yes, a COVID response for digital equity is great, but it's also great to do this because it's the right thing to do. And that's where we were. And so, all of last year, It was us building relationships with funders and an indiscriminate amount of actors to really say, if we are going to sustainably reduce this digital divide, knowing that we need to take a long-term focus to this because the digital divide is exacerbated by the cycle of poverty, and because we have very little federal alignment on the topic, specifically because we're in urban America, we've had to really take on a role of one being a fundraiser. Commissioner Starks had mentioned that we've been having conversations about exhausting our local resources on the topic of K through 12. It's made national news that thanks to the leadership from a number of funders, including General Motors, Quicken Loans, DTE, we were able to raise $23 million to ensure that every single public school student gets a device, 6 months of LTE data, tech support, and an agreement to sign them up for Internet Essentials on the back end. And while, yes, we have, two low-cost internet providers in the city, and low cost, we're saying that's less than $10 a month, only one of them meets the federal threshold for broadband. And so everything that we're doing has been very, very strategic, because we understand that if we're not going to do this in a long-term basis, we're only going to do this on a project basis, or only act as if the digital divide is a COVID response, then what we essentially do, we make an investment, and then a year from now, where are we? And so, us building the model that we're building, we are prioritizing sustainability, we're prioritizing impact, we're shifting to more of a data-driven model where we can actually even use that to guide investments in this space. I'll tell people, whenever we say digital equity, that actually means something. Equity is not a buzzword. Equity is us saying that it's going to be a commitment for the least of us, that yes, citywide broadband might be sexy, but citywide Wi-Fi might be sexy, but neighborhood Wi-Fi, where we actually know these neighborhoods are underconnected, that's what equity is. And so we are prioritizing digital equity, we're prioritizing sustainability, and we're thankful for the opportunity to get a semblance of alignment by way of this call. But moving forward, we are seeking that alignment with the federal government, with the state, in a way that we know that there's a chain of command and a chain of action to support digital equity in Detroit. I'll end by saying that given that the sheer inequity in Michigan and in Detroit as it relates to digital inequity, us solving bridging the digital divide in a sustainable fashion locally on the ground here, it's great for America. Michigan is a microcosmic representation of the U.S. Detroit represents the plight of a lot of urban cities. And if we are effectively able to bridge it here locally, that is a replicable model that we can take, and that is actually rooted in some success and actual partnerships that are meant to last.
Doing in the city of Detroit, and particularly when it comes to the public-private partnerships that you guys are partnering, especially with Quicken Loans. They are very instrumental in the city of Detroit and being a great business partner within the city, and also within the state. So let's just keep the trend going and talking about the youth. Now I want to bring in Amina Fazula. Amina, you are a wonderful policy advocate working with Common Sense Media. I've been talking a lot about how COVID-19 has really showcased a lot of the inequality that has always existed within America. And it doesn't show itself more than ever than how K through 12 is being advocated for. You guys do focus a lot on the work within children. So for me, I have a two-part question for you. How are you guys addressing and advocating with policies as people in Congress are creating different stimulus packages and thinking about ways to be a solution for the problem that we're experiencing? So how are you guys advocating for the youth during this time period? But then also, too, if you could give us a little bit of insight into your boardrooms in terms of how are you thinking about shifting your policy advocacy post-COVID-19 after seeing all the inequities that has been revealed that wasn't so glaring at first?
Hi there, this is Amina. Can you hear me? Great. I can't hear your audio now, so I'm just gonna talk, assuming everybody can hear me. All right. So that's a great question. Let me start with a few numbers first. These are old numbers, an estimated 12 million students left offline, and we have been advocating for connectivity for students at home around the homework gap for years. But now, in light of COVID-19, our understanding of what the homework gap is completely different. So that has been, I think, a new hurdle to explain to policymakers, that it's more than just one device in the household in some amount of connectivity, but rather we need to have really robust connectivity so that every student in the household can access distance learning simultaneously, and that every student in the household has a device that they can actually do schoolwork on. And it grows beyond that. Teachers, we're hearing from teachers. We put out a survey through our Connect All Students campaign, and we heard from over 200 teachers from about 200 teachers from 39 states, telling us that they're having difficulties themselves connecting as well as their own students. So this is a new issue for Congress to grapple with, understanding the level of support that schools need exists well beyond the four walls of the school itself, that teachers need to be supported within their homes with adequate access to broadband, and also with adequate access to devices as well.
Thank you so much, Amina, for your conversation and for the words that you have brought into this space. Audience, up to this point, I've been focusing on the K through 12, in particular within Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, Joshua Edmonds, and the work the city of Detroit is doing. And we just heard from Amina with the work that Common Sense Media is really doing and advocating for that. Now I want to bring in a special guest, Angela Seifer from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, to really talk about, if you will, Angela, I started mentioning how COVID-19 has exposed so much inequities within our system for all the reasons, in particular K through 12. But as we expand and we go beyond K through 12 to the adult population, if you will, I want to talk about low-income residents of the United States of America, and particularly within the state of Michigan too as well, and how has COVID-19 exposed the inequities of the digital divide that's impacted them, right? It's impacted individuals being able to participate, into the job force and the work economy, with the inability to possibly see what jobs are available. Even when we think about the gig economy, right? Access to digital divide and broadband access to really sign up for services like Instacart or other gig economy entities that provide that type of service. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing the inequities being exposed due to COVID-19, and what is most on your mind as eventually we will come out of this, whenever that is, but what is on your mind next on the slate for advocacy, recognizing all the divisions that we see now?
Sure, Mike. Hi, everyone. Big thanks to all my Michigan friends for inviting me. I think maybe there wasn't a realization that I'm born and bred from Ohio, and you all still let me participate. So I'm glad I did that. I didn't let the rivalry get in the way.
Angela, just as long as you didn't go to Ohio State.
No, University of Toledo for me.
That means you're smart. We like you. Keep going.
Okay, super. I'm not going to get kicked off the webinar. So I think, Mike, that's a great question. What we know is that the lower a household's income, the less likely they are to have broadband in the home. And if we look at the US Census data, even if we take into account mobile, 18 million US households do not have any kind of internet, even mobile. 14 million of those 18 million are urban. So this tells us that it is a not only an availability issue, that there's much more beyond that. And I love that we are in this conversation addressing all of the barriers. We are addressing the availability of the internet. We are addressing the cost of the internet, right? The affordability of it, but then also the digital skills. Because if you don't have all of those things and the device, you have some of those, not all of them, how far is that going to get you? So the lower your income, the less likely you are to have broadband in the home, less likely you are to be using it. And in today's world, like it was hard before, we would always talk about how important, right? It's my work. My work is important. But now the difference, I think it's life and death. I didn't think of it like that before, but now I do think of it like that. If folks can't stay in their homes and stay safe, they are forced to go out to order groceries, right? As you were saying, the gig economy, to participate, all the things that those of us who do have access totally make use of in order to stay safe. And then in order also, we know that staying safe ourselves is part of our community. So we need to be looking at it as how this crisis has helped us draw attention to the issue, but then we can't let it go, right? What's that saying about, not letting a good crisis go to waste? We have drawn new attention to this right now. And as has already been mentioned, and Josh is totally on the right track with this, let's keep rolling with it. Because if we can really solve it, wouldn't that be incredible?
I want to bring back Commissioner Sparks. I want to bring back Representative Lawrence, just to kind of hear your initial reaction to what our panelist has to say, and particularly with you, Commissioner Sparks. We heard Representative Slotkin talk about the rural communities and the different dynamics that she has to address just within her state and within her district that represents all those different dynamics and variables. We've heard from Lieutenant Garlin Gilchrist, who really began to focus and take us specifically on the K through 12 dynamic that we see. And then Joshua came through within the city of Detroit, and then Amina with our kids, and with Angela really talking about the gig economy. And so we have this whole reflectiveness going on. What is your reaction in particular to what Angela said of, can we solve for these things, or is it too far gone?
Yes, well, thank you. Obviously all of this is exactly why we've convened such a distinguished panel here. Obviously taking some threads, rural America, we do find the issue there most pointedly is access. And in particular in the last year, although I had some issues with the way that it was specifically done, and this gets into broadband mapping issues, we had a $20 billion Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that the FCC is going to have for 10 years to basically lay connectivity out to our rural areas. The hard part there is that to actually get connectivity out to rural areas, it is going to take kind of a number of years. It's not, you're not able to quickly roll truck and get connectivity out there. You really do need to have an incentive, a subsidy program in order to get connectivity out there. And I am glad that we are rolling out rural connectivity to Americans there. In urban areas, though, as I pointed out, most pointedly, there's Pew Research data that shows that 18 million Americans do not sign up for the internet, are disconnected because it's simply too expensive. And we know now, in particular, obviously, with the swell of Americans that are finding themselves jobless now, I think that's why I have critically, and a lot of us that are in this policy space and hearing certainly a chorus here today, have really started to drill down on how do we make sure that there are affordable options for our students. When you're talking about these K through 12 students, in particular, my mind goes to these Title I households. For a lot of students, we know that their most consistent meal comes from a Head Start breakfast and a free lunch. And a lot of schools are staying open in order to deliver those lunches. And so we know that those are also the most disconnected homes at home in terms of households. And so how do we focus on some of these that are the most low income, the most vulnerable, and have students that are going to need to learn and grow? And so obviously the idea of hotspots has come about, and I'm all for hotspots. I mentioned it at the top of my opening remarks, but I'm working with industry where, there's not a great sense of how many hotspots there are in America and how effective it is. Somewhere between 500 and 600,000 hotspots is what I've heard. And so that will do some good work. And also the ability of certain devices to become hotspots. But really, we're going to need to get affordable connectivity into more homes. And that does come to the issue of making sure that we connect all Americans.
Commissioner Starks, I was so excited to turn to you. I called you Sparks. I apologize for that, but you are sparking this conversation. If I can save myself, conversation.
Thank you so much. The takeaways that I got, there was a point that was brought up. Can you imagine being a graduate of high school or college, and it's now time for you to seek a job? The reality of mailing in resumes doesn't exist anymore. Can you imagine the barriers to getting employment if you do not have broadband or access to internet. Again, pushing a segment of our population to a different side of less opportunity. Um, Telemedicine is going to become critical for healthcare in America. Mental health, which we must take the issue of mental health to a higher level. When we get out of this crisis and try to bring some normalcy back to our lives, people who have not been able to grieve, the people who have died, the people who are children who are asking questions, why can't I go play with my friend? Why can't I go outside? What do you mean we have to stay safe? So I'm going to go back outside. Am I safe? Mental health is going to become a great issue, and I know that we have implemented it with the veterans. Um, but you have to have a computer at home so that you can uh, participate. Ordering grocery, I was told by a number of my friends who are in my age bracket, don't even take the risk. Order your grocery and have them delivered. Well, I'm sitting at home with a computer. I can do that. The infrastructure. You have heard us in Congress have this continuous fight on investing in infrastructure. And everybody thinks about roads. They think about potholes and bridges. But infrastructure is also our broadband. Where are we with infusing infrastructure for our broadband into our budgets and into our planning? The electric car is kind of putting some energy around that, because in order for us to have the smart cars or the electric cars and other thing, we have to infuse into our into infrastructure when we're doing roads to make sure that the road can talk to the car can talk to um, all the other infrastructure needs that comes in for navigation and other things. But the investment in infrastructure is something we need to keep our eye on. And Commissioner Starks, I really want you to lend your voice. And when we again have another fight in this appropriation season, I sit on transportation and infrastructure, that we have to fight for an inclusive um, infrastructure budget. And lastly, the affordability piece. We have an issue in Detroit with water, and I tell people we need clean water, we need safe water, and we need affordable water. Not only in Detroit, but around this country, affordability of a basic human need is a real issue right now. Just to give some more numbers, the state of Michigan has over 360,000 households, and that equates to 1 out of every 4 child in Michigan does not have access. And in addition to that, Detroit has nearly 40% of its population has no internet connection at all. So with that, I lend back to you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lawrence. You said something really interesting about infrastructure. And I think that it's important that we begin to rebrand the term of infrastructure, right? And I believe that if we rebrand the narrative of infrastructure, because that is what we think about, I believe you can get the American public more on board when it comes to that. Because if I'm someone sitting who's unemployed, and you talk about infrastructure, I may not think I have the skill sets to work on a highway system. I may not think that I have the skill sets to work on a bridge, right? So, and therefore, I don't feel any hopefulness of something can be done. As we move forward, I want to ask a host point of privilege, if you will. Dr. Elissa, if you can leave me unmuted as I go through this next round, so I can help manage the time that we have that's available. Panelists, I want to kind of just give like a 1-minute assessment. I'm going to bump you off your talking points for a second, and I'm going to switch things up because what Angela Seifer and Joshua Edmonds, you guys have stirred something in me. Joshua, we were talking about public-private partnerships, and Angela, you were talking about being solution-oriented, and I beg the question that this doesn't have to be rhetorical. We had a lot of statements from all of you, which was very fantastic. A lot of it seems like a lot to move the mountain on almost. Right. And I have this thing that I believe that politicians always, or I should say Congress in DC, often has a time of talking to themselves, right? Congress in DC has a thing of not really, the question is to ask for people to participate, but actually not doing the tangible things that are needed for people to participate. And so now I want to move in, I'm asking you one by one, please leave your responses just to a minute so that we can move forward with this, so we conclude at a decent amount of time here with Dr. Elissa. Please keep me unmuted. U.S. Representative Slotkin, I want to ask you specifically, as a member of Congress, in a dream scenario, who would you want to partner with in a public-private partnership to address the inequities of this, right? Yes, you have your colleagues in Congress. Yes, you have your colleagues on the Hill, but who would you want to partner with outside of DC that can help move this inequities of digital divide that we're talking about here today?
Well, I mean, listen, you've got the standard companies who produce this, and we've seen some of them make offers and during COVID-19 to try and bring down some of the prices. But I think, again, frankly, I would look to history. There was a moment in time when we didn't have telephone service and electric service and water, and we made a decision as a country that you had access to that. As an American, you should have access to those things. So we don't have to make this up from whole cloth. We have actually a model for how to do this. And I actually think, and while I'm right there with you, that Congress also often talks to itself, we know that we will be doing some sort of stimulus program, and it will almost certainly involve infrastructure. So what if we actually took the moment and said, you know what, we always talk about starting with the shovel-ready projects, start with the broadband. Like, just make a commitment that at the top of the list, you're going to have this moment of opportunity when we all kind of come to something on broadband, and we're going to put it at the top of the list. And for every other shovel-ready project, if you're going to be digging up a road, if you're going to be putting in new bridges, what are you doing on broadband, and prove it before you get approval for that funding. So I do think that while we have been known to talk to ourselves, we do have a moment of opportunity in the next 3 months to actually prioritize these things and do some of the things that some of the panelists are talking about.
Lieutenant Governor, from a public-private partnership in the state of Michigan, what entities or individuals, you don't have to call them out by name, would you want to see being brought up to work together in the state capitol in Lansing with you to help solve for these inequities? Because we know the state legislature alone cannot solve for this.
I think that, well, first of all, I echo what the Congresswoman just said in terms of how we should use this as an opportunity to build this infrastructure. We're thinking about this in terms of state level infrastructure. But I'd like to see more engagement from the advocacy community and philanthropy as well on this. How can we look at finding what the business models of the future to deliver internet access in a sustainable way? And they're going to need to be partners to pilot those projects. So we need to have a different type of investor come to the table to partner with us. We need to have community organizations also think about how we can build the sort of highly localized capacities for what Josh was talking about in terms of neighborhood level services, and how maybe those sorts of coalitions can come together and, again, develop a different model for delivery, a different business model for making that sustainable. That's the innovation that I'm excited about. And I think there are lots of opportunities to explore that.
I love how you said that. That is a solution that a lot of us can rally around. That's a solution a lot of us can help support you within that. I'm thinking about what some of the other state governors are doing around a lot of philanthropic endeavors that are existing. And it may not be fair because a lot of the billionaires kind of exist within the tri-state area, so we're assisting with that. But you don't have to be a billionaire to be able to be a philanthropic endeavor, which leads me right to you, Joshua. Lieutenant Governor mentioned philanthropy and from an investment from advocacy groups. When it comes to that, how would you give counsel, if you will, to types like Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, individuals like myself consider myself to be an advocate and a philanthropist? How would you govern us to make sure that you're getting the resources that you need? Because that is a management issue too as well. And the city of Detroit, with all the public-private partnership that you just mentioned earlier, talks a little bit about managing that ecosystem of philanthropy and advocacy.
So one, I'm thankful that you're an advocate. I will definitely keep that in mind to the max. But I'll say for us, managing that is us doing a good job at the onset of managing expectations, saying your investment in this and X will yield this with total confidence. In order for us to get there, that is us building out a data infrastructure. To Commissioner Starks' point, he's been very, very outspoken on this. Our data on digital inclusion, specifically on broadband availability, is abysmal. We need a new way of collecting this information. And if we collect the information in the right way, I can empower my philanthropic community. I can even empower the federal government. If they are to move and finally invest in underserved communities the way that they need to, I can do it in a data-informed way. As it stands now, we're not doing that. And so we talk about moving the needle. We'll talk about a grandiose, $23 million, which is incredible. But at the same time, we are not data-driven and data-informed enough. I would just say if I go down my list of asks right now, one, the state of Michigan, let's prioritize and get the state broadband office up and running. If the Digital Equity Act were to pass today, we would not be able to get funding from it because the state broadband office needs to be the intermediary to allocate the funds at the municipal level. The FCC, let's talk about really tackling this asymmetrical broadband. 25.325 prioritizes the providers. We need you to prioritize the consumers. Congress, we've made a lot of investments on this, in lieu of COVID. 23 million again in the city of Detroit. If you guys are talking about doing any investment around broadband, it would be really great if we started talking about matching, so that way we didn't exhaust our local resources just for you guys to come in afterwards. And so that's kind of where I am, solution oriented. I hope that's under a minute.
Joshua, you did a fantastic job. And I love how you call people to task on that one. No holds barred with that. Present company included. And just how you handle that, like with no chill, I got you on record with everything you need. How you called out the FCC and Congress simultaneously while they're on the call. Brilliant. I see why you're there. I really believe that you shouldn't take a job such as that if you're not willing to take a stance on behalf of your constituency. I salute you, my brother, for doing that and being solution oriented and with a smile. So I want to go, in a minute, I want to go to Amina. We're talking about advocacy, right? And so as an advocate, what do you need more, right, in order to help you empower from like a partnership, like a public-private partnership as an advocate? What do you need more?
I mean, absolutely, we need to have good data, as Joshua mentioned. So data drives enthusiasm both from policymakers, but from partners that we have. We can develop partners in industry, we can develop partners on the ground, we can develop partners in philanthropy, as well as with policymakers. So good data helps drive all those partnerships. But right now, I think, I see an immediate need to cover, the homework gap and also the critical needs of all Americans to be able to access the internet so they can stay safe and they can stay home, as Angela mentioned. But then we've got to look forward. We will certainly have a recovery package. When that recovery package shows up, it's got to have infrastructure in it. That infrastructure has to go to every home. Got to cover those urban underserved areas as well as rural underserved areas. And it's got to prioritize the best possible technology. These hard to reach communities, we learned through COVID-19 that people need adequate, robust access. And we also want to make sure that we use our precious government dollars effectively and efficiently. So prioritize the best possible future-proof technology for every single community, even the ones that are hard to reach. That's going to take a serious investment from the federal government, as well as matching funds from state government. But that'll pay off in the long run because upgrading that type of infrastructure will be so much easier and so much cheaper in the long run.
Thank you so much, Amina. Angela, I'm depending upon you. We have a short amount of time period, but I believe you can do it because you're an inspiration behind that second part of the question that I asked. From a solution-oriented perspective, from someone who can be a partner with you, Josh and Amina just doubled down on data. You were recognized as one of the 25 top doers in America when it comes to this type of stuff. What are you looking for in a partnership, or what do you need that will make a dream partnership for you in order to address the solution of inequities? In 1 minute, if you can. I believe in you.
Let me tell you, the real work right now is occurring on the ground. If I could replicate Josh and put him in every city, I would, right? Because that's where the real work is occurring. But what do all those Joshes out there need? They need help from the state. They need help from the feds, right? So we have to have, we're seeing it more so than ever before from philanthropy, from corporations, but there's still a lack of understanding of how that real work gets done. And so we have to have more of these conversations. Give me a magic wand, please. More of these in every state. To have you all in this virtual room talking about this, I cannot say how awesome that is. And we've never had this kind of attention on the issue before. How far might we go if we keep doing this and figuring out how we can all help all those Joshes out there? I have high hopes.
I agree with you on that one, Angela. With that being said, that wraps up my portion of this conversation. Thank you, all the panelists that are there. I hope that even the panelists would go back and watch this video and hear the thread that I'm seeing forming that could be a solution. Each one of you have said something really unique. I don't have time to discuss the thread, but there is a thread and a pattern that is showing up. I think Angela's seeing it too as well. I hope you do as well. Thank you so much for your time. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, who will close us out, followed by Commissioner Starks with some closing remarks.
I want to say thank you to everyone. You all are amazing. Josh, I just joined your fan club. I want everyone here to know that this is a real issue. It affects so many people as we talked about it. And if we truly want an amazing, prepared workforce in America, we're going to have to commit to broadband access. And this is not a giveaway. This is part of building a strong economy, an educated economy. And as we look at technology, reducing costs in so many areas, we can't do that without the broadband. Thank you all so much. And Commissioner Starks, thank you so much for having me here.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Congresswoman Slotkin, as well. And of course, to all the advocates. I could not agree more. I agree that there's, such a consistent thread. And I know from my position, obviously at the federal level, I'm always happy to hear from folks, even if the pointed barbs are at me.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks, and the panelists for having me and for being in conversation with me. This has been a conversation I've always wanted to have, and I could have thought of a better group of individuals to have this with. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's made you think about some things, and most importantly, the takeaway items of what we need to do to come together. Let's not all sit on the sidelines. We can all play an important part on digital equity. As always, hit me up at I am Mike Muse, MU, Essence and Sam E. And until next time, peace. You don't know you